So we're in Adobe Photoshop here on MyDesignClass, and what we're going to be doing in this video is taking a look at how we can actually warp layers in Photoshop. So this includes, but it's not just limited to, text objects, any kind of layer that you import. We're also going to be learning how to make smart objects just so that we improve our workflow and ensure that we can always go back on our changes. Great, so I have Adobe Photoshop open and all we have is a simple background that I've created. And what we're going to do is just create a simple object that we can actually warp into some different shapes. So what we're going to be using is a text object for this example, but you can use any kind of image that you have. So in order to create a text object, we're going to go to the text tool, which is just below the pen tool on the left-hand toolbar. As you can see, the shortcut to it is T, so that's both for Windows and Mac. And all you have to do is just press once anywhere on your image and then type in any text that you want. I'm going to be typing in warp because it is, after all, the name of this video. I'm going to select all the text, and because it's black, I'm just going to quickly change the color by going to the top here. And let's go for yellow. We haven't done yellow. And press OK. And then press the tick here just to confirm our choices. I'm going to quickly go to the Move tool, which is this first tool on the left-hand toolbar. And the shortcut to it is V, as you can see on the right-hand side here. And I'm just going to select the text and press Command and T on my keyboard in order to bring it into free transform. You can also do that by going to Edit and just selecting free transform here. That shortcut, by the way, is Ctrl and T if you're on Windows. And I'm just going to quickly scale this warp slightly larger just so we can actually see it a bit more clearly. Maybe something like that. And then as you can see, it's very handy. It gives us these purple guides so I can actually automatically snap it to the center of our image. Then once I'm happy with that, I'm once again just going to press on this tick at the top. So we have a simple text object that we've created. Perhaps you have created a shape or any other kind of image. Perhaps you've imported an image or whatever. This is going to work for all of the images that you use in Photoshop. Now we've created this text object, but one of the issues we're going to be facing is we can't actually warp a text object. If I go to the warp control at the moment, so you can do that by going to Edit, Transform, and then go to Warp. As you can see, we get this free transform box where we can't actually change anything. And this is because it's a text object and free transform works with rasterized layers. So I'm just going to quickly undo that by pressing on this little stop icon here. Now, in order to rasterize this layer, this basically means to pixelate the layer. At the moment, we have a text object, which isn't a fully rasterized layer because we can actually go ahead and change any of the text at will. So what we might normally do is we might go to the layer in the layers panel, right click, and then go to rasterize type, which would then change this to a pixelated layer, which you can't then go ahead and edit any further. But I'm actually going to undo that just by pressing Command and Z on my keyboard, Control and Z for Windows. So this would obviously be a very destructive process where we can't actually go ahead and change the text later. For example, let's say this was our brand title and we actually decided to go ahead and change the name later on. It'd be very useful if we could actually make any changes to the text. Well, what we can do is we can actually store this layer within another object. So at the moment it's a text object, but you could have a layer of any sort. And what we can do is we can store it in a smart object. So in order to create a smart object, just go and find the layer in the layers panel, right click on your mouse and go to convert to smart object. And as you can see, this has now changed the thumbnail and we can no longer actually double click on the layer anymore in order to change the text. But what we've done is we've basically stored this information within a new object. And this object we can actually open up later and go ahead and change the original content. So just to demonstrate this, for example, as you can see, if I go to the text tool, to which shortcut was T, which we learned earlier, if I press here, as you can see, it creates a new object. It doesn't actually select the warp anymore. So in order to open that up, all I have to do is go to the object at the layers panel and double click with my left mouse button on the thumbnail itself. And as you can see, this opens up an entire new tab in Photoshop, which is just dedicated to the content in that smart object. And if I now go ahead and actually select on the text, you can see that I can now go ahead and change any of it. So this is just a very, very handy way in order to make sure that you can still later edit your text within this smart object. So this is great. We've now stored it within a smart object, but how do we actually warp this text, which is what we wanted to do? Well, I'm going to quickly go back to the move tool just by pressing V on my keyboard, and then making sure that the layer is selected, I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Warp. And as you can see, we now have a slightly different outline to the free transform outline, which means that we can now warp this object. So how warping works is basically we can manipulate any of these corners around our object in order to push this area of our image into a slightly different position. And you can also do that for any position in the layer at all. So for example, if I wanted to control just this top right hand corner of content in this layer, what I could do is use this corner and just drag it. And as you can see, I can warp out this section. So all of the other information that isn't affected close to this corner is still going to remain in its original position, but everything's sort of going to warp out in this direction. I can do the same in any of the other corners. I can move it in any direction that I want. I can even flip it over if that's what I'm looking for. And as you can see, you can kind of control the corners of your layer into any shape that you want. I'm just going to quickly undo that just by pressing Command and Z a few times. What you can also do is use these other indicators just slightly further out along the edge. And these actually work by creating curves in the outline of our layer. So for example, if I drag this up, as you can see, it's very similar to paths if you're familiar with how paths work in Photoshop, but it basically creates a curve in the outline to which the content in the layer has to stick to. And I can do this for any of them, so I can also go in the other direction and create kind of this wave look. And I can also do it at the bottom, so I could maybe drag this up slightly or maybe move this one down. And as you can see, we now have this kind of flag or wave look going through our content. Once again, I'm just going to quickly undo that. Now, lastly, what we can also do is we can actually manipulate any point on the layer itself. So you don't actually have to stick to these points on the outside. You can actually select and drag any part of the layer. So for example, let's say I wanted to manipulate it from the center of this layer, so about here. If I just hold and drag on my left mouse key, as you can see, I can actually reposition the content within the center of our layer itself. I could then leave it like this and then make another point here and actually just affect these other points. And you can keep going and doing all the same. Now, as you can see, the more drastic we go, it does actually extend over the edge of the outline. So you can create some very weird looking effects just by doing this. So I'm just going to undo that once more. So let's say we wanted to create an effect with this warp. Perhaps we want to curve our text going up and then down. So what we can do is we can use a mixture of the outlines to create the initial curve, like so, and then use the ones at the bottom in order to create that curve outline even further. Now, as you can see, the problem that we're having is that the content is going over the edge. So what we can now use is that third technique by pressing in the center and actually just dragging the content back up so that it looks slightly more like in normal position and that it sticks within the outline itself. And then all you have to do, if you're happy with your choice, is just go to the top where we have this tick and the stop sign, just the same like when we had the text tool, and then we can just press on the tick in order to confirm our choices. Now, one or two things to bear in mind when we are warping content in Photoshop. First of all, if I just zoom in by pressing Command and plus on my keyboard or Control and plus for Windows, and then by selecting the hand tool, for which the shortcut is H, both for Windows and Mac, I can just quickly move it and reposition it. Now, as you can see, one of the things you have to bear in mind is when you warp content in Photoshop, because it's pixelated, some parts will stretch and some parts will actually compact. So as you can see here, some of the content has compacted, which makes a very, very harsh outline. But here, in contrast, and also in these edges, and also here and here, the content has actually stretched, which has blurred the outline. So the more drastic you go, the harsher these effects will become. So for example, if I just quickly zoom out again by pressing Command and minus or Control and minus for Windows, let's say we make a very, very drastic change. Let's go to Edit, Transform, and Warp once more. And let's say we drag this part all the way into this corner. Perhaps we move this one something like this. I'm just going to make something really, really drastic. like so, and then press tick to confirm. Then as you can see, when I zoom in once again, here's a great example of where the content has really stretched and the outline is no longer sharp, so it's been blurred quite a lot. Whereas here, it hasn't been stretched as much, so it's still relatively sharp. So these are some of the things you have to watch out for, especially if you're increasing the size of your shape. This is going to happen quite drastically when the pixels get stretched too far. Now, of course, just to fully demonstrate the impact of using the smart object and why I highly encourage you to use it at all times, not even just for the warp, but for anything that you do in Photoshop. Let's say we wanted to change the text by just double clicking on the content itself. And let's change this to text and then press tick and then press save, Command and S for me or Control and S for Windows. As you can see, it's now changed that text, but still kept the warp changes that we made. So this is just a great way in order to make sure that you can always go back and edit your original content. And this is the same if you had an image there or any other type of layer, you can always go back and change it. So those were the basics of how the warp transform property works in Adobe Photoshop.